Welcome to the last video in the Logstash session, where we're going to be talking about the different outputs you have in Logstash, the different output plugins that are out of the box. So here I'm going to talk about output plugins, and then we're going to kind of categorize the plugins in a way I made up as I was putting this course together. So we'll talk about the logging or streaming data use cases. We'll talk about notifications, and then kind of application integration. So these aren't strict guidelines of how to use these plugins, but I looked at it as a way to start. The output plugins that come with Logstash are many. We have so far looked at the Elasticsearch output primarily. We've looked at the standard the console output, as well as the Ruby debug configuration for the console output. So we can see the messages that are coming out of Logstash in kind of a working debug session, so we can make sure our transformations, our groks, our formatting, making sure they're all happening. For this video, I wanted to look at a few categories of Logstash outputs, and I'm not going to cover them all. There are a ton. I'll show you the page list of the default out-of-the-box output plugins. But the logging streaming use case, as I see it, is kind of that never-ending stream of data. This is that machine data or application logs that you never really expect to end. Then we'll look at some application integration patterns, as well as notifications. And for me, notifications are kind of the lower volume things where you need to get a user involved typically, so an email or something like that. You can go to the Elastic website, which I'll show you in a little bit, and find a big list of the default plugins that come with your installation. And then there are a lot of documentation on how you can write your own Logstash output filter. That's beyond the scope of this class, but I highly recommend you look there if you have, say, a custom application that your team has built, a new open source project you're contributing to the world. This could be a great way to get it integrated with a lot of ecosystems that are already out there by allowing people who already use Logstash to shove data into your application. So for the logging or streaming use case, there are, I listed 20 or so different outputs here, and I think there were more that I could have put on this page, but I ran out of space. So I do, like I said, I see this as that continuous stream of data. This is your monitoring data where you're going to monitor the health of your system, or you're going to pull log files and just continually watch log files that might tell you how what status is of your application or code, whatnot. I find you would use this, if you were going to Elasticsearch, you'd use the different indices by day or by week. Or this is a great way to just kind of persist a ton of data in whatever format you want to persist it in. So some examples here, I'll pick a few and talk about them. Like CloudWatch is an AWS tool where you can do reporting and you can get metrics and you can monitor system health. This is a way using the CloudWatch output to give your own custom metrics there. CSV is exactly as it says. You can dump your metrics to a comma separated value file. We've used Elasticsearch a lot. Kafka. So Kafka is like the standard data streaming platform. You can distribute this thing horizontally in clusters, and you can have redundancy of your data streams, and you can have multiple consumers. It's a very popular, extremely high speed publish subscribe application. Kind of like a RabbitMQ or something like that. Loggly is a logging as a service application. It feels very much like Kibana if you use it. You have to pay for it. It's a third-party system, but they provide a way for you to say, here are my logs coming out of Logstash. I don't want to build my own Elasticsearch cluster, but I'll send it to you, Loggly, and I can do some reporting there. MongoDB is another great persistence mechanism. Nagios is your system monitoring application. Redis has a publish-subscribe module or data type within it, so you can have a log stream coming out of Logstash to a pub sub in Redis. You can broadcast UDP packets on the network if you want. And so there are so many ways you can just continually output data to another system here for those types of use cases. And I did skip over file if you wanted to persist data to a file. Maybe read from multiple files, standardize some format, and shove it into one file. Next, let's talk about the notifications and the applications bucket, as I'm calling them. I listed a lot fewer, but again, you could use anything here. So notifications to me is where I need someone to see this message. I need someone to react. I need someone to be aware of a certain condition or a certain data type or something happened. So I'm going to send an email to someone. So you can imagine you don't want to send an email output for your Linux system monitoring, or else you'll be sending millions of emails per day to your poor help desk, and they wouldn't like that. Same with an IRC channel. You can dump IRC messages. SNS is Amazon's simple notification service. So again, you can send emails or any other mechanism there. And in the applications bucket, I only picked two here because I thought these were pretty powerful and really generic in what they do. So the first one is exec. So exec means run an external program when something happens. This is, again, probably a low volume type of action you want to trigger. And you can do whatever you want. You can run a piece of code that does that locks down your network, or a piece of code that spins up a new server somewhere. The other is external HTTP or HTTPS call. Think of a webhook or some sort of callback mechanism or some command that you're issuing to a custom application. Maybe, again, it notifies someone or flips a status from green to red on the big dashboard that somebody's looking at all day long. So I'm kind of looking at these as those low volume, make sure someone or some application knows something very special probably happened. All right, now I'm going to flip over to that page of the Logstash outputs, and I'll show you why. So if we go to the Elastic site and we find Logstash output plugins, we can scroll down and you can see that there are just dozens and dozens of these outputs. The important part to notice, though, when you use one of these outputs, you got to be very careful and be aware of what configuration options are needed. So let's pick an example of this HTTP or HTTPS output. So on this page, you can see that the plugin version is 5.2. The last release was on January 15th, 2018 at the time of this recording. Links to GitHub and support. This is an official Elastic application, so you can, if you have a support contract with them, you can email your support guys and gals, or you can go to the web forums. What this does is it allows you to make an HTTP call. Pretty straightforward. As it says here, it can execute up to poolmax, which is a variable we'll find below, requests in parallel. So this is a nice way to load balance and not just bottleneck on a single HTTP request. But so here are all the different parameters for this output plugin. Now, a lot of these are shared with general output plugins. So here are some specifics for this plugin. Your CA cert, client key for TLS, for authenticated TLS requests. We can set up various HTTP or TCP items like connection timeout. HTTP, we can say our content type. Cookies, we can maintain cookies or send cookies here. Follow redirects is, if the server returns a HTTP 302 response, do I make another request to get the next URL? You can output the different message formats, headers, use HTTP compression, gzip or not, which HTTP method you want to use for this call. So here, if you want to call a post, a put, a get, a delete, you can do all of those. Keep alive, again, is a TCP concept. Key stores, mapping, so there are dozens of options in here as well. Primarily, you want to look for the URL. So that's the one we want to set to make sure that our HTTP gets to the right place. Now below, it's more details about all those options, telling you whether it's a number, a path, a string, a Boolean value, or like in this case of format, it can only be one of the predefined types of JSON batch form message. And look at the required column here to make sure you're picking up here. So HTTP method is required. URL is required. So those are two primary pieces of configuration that you definitely will have to put in your output plugin section of your Logstash pipeline config. So it's pretty straightforward. We didn't even talk about Solr or SQS or StatsD. I picked the top 20 or so that I wanted to, but there are lots and lots of them. So if there's a system that is pretty normal and pretty standard that folks are going to use, look at this page and find out if the plugin is there And if not, you can build your own. All right, so that is the end of our Logstash video section. If you were to go back and watch the videos again, or you want to tell your friends about them, we talked about the general configuration of Logstash. In those configurations, we talk about things like how many threads to use, how much memory to use, general application configuration for Logstash. Then we looked at the different pipeline configurations and how we can get data into Logstash and then how we can get it out somewhere. I almost said how we can get it in, how we can process it and get it out, but that was the next session on Logstash filters. So the filters are the things where we can enhance data or manipulate our data or change the format of our data. We looked heavily at the Grok filter plugin because that's the one, especially if you use an application that you don't control the output from it, you can use the Grok plugin to normalize that output into a document or into a JSON structure. Then we looked at how do we get data from distributed systems into Logstash as a server so you can centralize where you're doing this work. We talked about the Beats ecosystem, which is the perfect client for Logstash as a server. The Beats ecosystem or the Beat plugins or the Beat protocol, whatever terms you want to use, they're the really lightweight data shippers that you can use a Docker container or in a very small system to get data back to your Elasticsearch cluster. And then finally in this video, we went whirlwind pace through what Logstash output plugins are. I went over a couple of top high-level ones. We didn't get into much detail except for the HTTP output, just to show an example of how the Elastic documentation is set up so you can find out how to configure your Kafka client or how to configure your Redis client. So all of that wealth of configuration data is there. These are widely used, so the internet is your friend. Google for it, shoot me an email, find me, and I can help you out with these things if you have a couple of questions. So in our next videos, we're going to be diving much deeper into Kibana, specifically around the visualizations of data and how we can use those in a dashboard to build some custom dashboards that would impress our bosses, which is what we need to do. We need to make sure that they have the data they need to do their jobs too, whether it's your boss or whether it's a client or whether it's a person within your application, or whether it's a person within your enterprise using the data you're providing. You need a great way to show them high-level data that they can choose based on your dashboards, whether to drill in to look at the small pieces of data behind your dashboards.